My son looked me in the eye and told me I was worthless, that I only ate and never helped. He said it in the stunning $5.8 million house I let him live in. I just smiled. But as he slept that night, unaware I was already setting in motion a plan that would end with a certified letter on his desk. A letter that would not just take back the house but dismantle his entire world. If you've ever felt taken for granted, hit that like button and subscribe and tell me in the comments where you are listening from. You won't want to miss how this ends. The kitchen was cold, not in temperature but in spirit. I stood there, a 72-year-old man, in a space that felt more like a surgical theater than the heart of a home. My son Kevin's home. I ran a soft cloth over the countertop, a vast island of Calicotta marble, its gray veins sprawling like a frozen river. The recessed lighting overhead glared down, making the stainless steel appliances gleam with an impersonal shine. There wasn't a single magnet on the refrigerator, not one childish drawing or grocery list. Everything was clean, sterile, and silent save for the low, self-satisfied hum of the Sub-Zero refrigerator. My late wife Clara would have hated this kitchen. She loved warm, oak-cluttered counters, the smell of baking bread, and the chaos of life. This place had no life. It was a showroom, a statement. And for the last 10 days since my minor knee surgery, it had been my temporary residence. I finished polishing away a small water ring, a task that gave me a momentary sense of purpose. This house, a sprawling contemporary masterpiece in the heart of Palo Alto, was not a gift. Kevin and his wife Jessica seemed to forget that crucial detail. It was an asset, a significant piece of my portfolio held within the secure legal fortress of the Sterling Family Revocable Trust. A trust I had established years ago, and of which I was the sole trustee. Clara had insisted on it. I remember her words as our lawyer drafted the documents. "A safety net, Leo," she had said, her hand resting on mine. "Not a golden parachute. There's a difference." I understood that difference now more than ever. The sound of soft, expensive loafers on the polished concrete floor announced my son's arrival. Kevin entered the kitchen, already holding his phone to his ear, a Bluetooth device blinking in the other. He was 41, dressed in clothes that cost more than my first car, and he carried himself with the unshakable confidence of a man who had never truly faced failure. He gave me a quick nod, a gesture one might give a doorman, and proceeded to the espresso machine. No synergy is the wrong play here, Mark," he said into his headset. "We need to leverage the disruption pivot, the asset class." He spoke a language of buzzwords that I, a retired CPA who had built a fortune on hard numbers and tangible assets, found utterly meaningless. His wife Jessica followed a moment later. She was a woman who seemed to be sculpted from the very same marble as the countertops, all sharp angles and cool surfaces. She smiled at me, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Oh, Leo, you're up and about. You really don't have to clean, you know. We have a service for that." She opened a cabinet, her smile tightening. "And I see you've reorganized the spice rack." I had. The jumble of jars was illogical, so I had arranged them alphabetically. It was a simple, helpful act. "It's just that I have a system," she continued, her voice dripping with condescending sweetness. "It's alphabetized by cuisine profile. Pan-Asian on the left, Mediterranean on the right. It's just more efficient." I simply nodded. "My apologies. I didn't realize." Kevin ended his call and walked over, placing a heavy hand on my shoulder. "Don't worry about it, Dad. We know you mean well. It's good for you to have little projects to keep you busy. Old folks have too much time on their hands, right?" He winked as if we were sharing a joke at my expense. I didn't respond. I just watched them move around the kitchen, a seamless team of self-interest, taking for granted the very floor beneath their feet. Later that afternoon, I noticed the hinge on the garden gate was loose, swinging awkwardly in the breeze. I retrieved my small toolkit from my car and spent half an hour fixing it, replacing a rusted screw, adding a drop of oil until it swung smoothly and silently. I also spent some time tending to the rose bushes near the front door. Jessica had bought them for a dinner party 2 weeks ago and had promptly forgotten about them. Their heads were drooping, starved for water. No one noticed me doing these things. Or if they did, they didn't comment. My small contributions were invisible like I was. The tipping point came, as it so often does, over dinner. The air was thick with unspoken things. My grandchildren, 8-year-old Liam and 6-year-old Maya, sat between us, small, silent observers in a quiet war. Kevin was holding court, talking animatedly about a new startup he was advising. It was something to do with artificial intelligence and gourmet pet food delivery. "It's about scaling, Dad," he said, gesturing with a fork. "You wouldn't understand. The old models of business, brick and mortar tangible assets, they're dinosaurs. It's all about intellectual property and market disruption now." I didn't argue. I just cut into my chicken, which was dry and overcooked. Jessica sighed dramatically, setting her wineglass down with a delicate click. "The property taxes on this place are just criminal," she announced to no one in particular. "And with the cost of everything in Palo Alto, groceries, the kids' tutors, it's a mountain." That was the opening Kevin was waiting for. He leaned back in his chair, took a slow sip of his expensive Cabernet, and then fixed his gaze on me right across the polished mahogany table. His voice was casual, but his words were honed to a razor's edge. "Well," he said, a small, cruel smile playing on his lips, "things would be easier if some people did more than just eat and take up space. You eat, but you don't help contribute." Silence. It descended on the table like a shroud. Even the children felt it. Liam froze with his fork halfway to his mouth. Maya looked from her father to me, her eyes wide with confusion. The words hung in the air, ugly and undeniable. He had not just insulted me, he had defined me, reduced me to a burden, a mouth to feed. Worthless. My first instinct, a primal flicker of rage, was to stand up, to shout, to list the decades of sacrifice, the endless hours of work, the very foundation of wealth that allowed him to sit there in his designer shirt and pass judgment. But I silenced it. Rage was his weapon, not mine. My weapons were patience and precision. So I did something that confused him more than any outburst could have. I looked at him, held his gaze, and slowly, deliberately smiled. I placed my knife and fork neatly on my plate, took a sip of water, and nodded. "You're right, son," I said, my voice perfectly level. "I should think about how I can contribute more." The confusion on his face was a small, fleeting victory. He had expected a fight, and I had given him agreement. He had no response. The rest of the dinner passed in that same thick, suffocating silence. Later, when I said goodnight to the children, Liam hugged me a little tighter than usual. He knew. Children always know. I went not to my bedroom, but to the large, empty living room. I didn't turn on the lights. I sat in an uncomfortable, modern armchair that looked better than it felt, a perfect metaphor for the house itself. The city lights of Silicon Valley glowed through the floor-to-ceiling windows. I pulled my old leather wallet from my pocket. From a hidden flap, I took out a faded, dog-eared photograph of Clara. She was smiling, squinting into the sun, on a beach trip we took over 40 years ago. We were young and poor and ridiculously happy. I looked at her face and I thought about the promises we had made to each other. I thought of the 2 jobs I worked while she raised Kevin in our tiny rented apartment. I thought of the scraped-together down payment for our first home, a tiny bungalow that felt more like a palace than this $5 million tomb. Every decision, every risk, every long night at the office had been for him, to give him the life we never had. We had given him a safety net, and he had mistaken it for a throne. My son's words echoed in my mind. "You eat, but you don't help contribute." He didn't see the repaired gate, the watered roses, the lifetime of contributions that had built the very world he took for granted. He saw only a liability, an old man taking up space. In that moment, sitting in the dark, I felt a profound sense of clarity. The love I felt for my son was being eclipsed by the disrespect he showed for everything my wife and I had built. Protecting my family, I realized with a cold certainty, now meant protecting its legacy from my own son. This was not about revenge. It was about balance. It was about honor. It was about Clara. The adjustments needed to be made. Order must be restored. The digital clock on the bedside table read 4:17 a.m. Outside the window, the manicured world of Palo Alto was still shrouded in a deep artificial darkness, punctuated only by the soft glow of landscape lighting on perfectly trimmed hedges. I had not slept. The decision once made had settled into my bones, not with the heat of anger, but with the cold, hard weight of necessity. I rose from the bed, the slight ache in my knee, a dull reminder of why I was here in the first place. Moving with a silence learned from a lifetime of early mornings, I dressed in the clothes I had laid out the night before. I did not pack the rest of my things. I would not be needing them. I moved through the cavernous house a ghost in my own son's kingdom. The air was still and cool, recycled by a silent, efficient HVAC system. In the vast kitchen, the marble countertops seemed to absorb all light, giving nothing back. I found a pen and a small notepad Jessica kept for grocery lists. On it, I wrote 5 simple words. Gone to handle some business. I didn't sign it. He would know who it was from. I placed the note squarely in the center of the cold marble island where no one could miss it. I didn't look back as I walked out, closing the heavy oak door behind me with a soft final click. My car, a modest sedan that was paid for in cash, felt like a sanctuary as I pulled away from the curb. I didn't drive east toward my own small, comfortable condominium. I drove north toward the city. As I merged onto the highway, the first hints of dawn were beginning to stain the eastern sky a bruised purple. The world was waking up, but a part of my own world was being put to rest. The drive across the Bay Bridge was cathartic. The iconic orange towers rose out of the morning fog, symbols of engineering and endurance. I felt a kinship with them. I was a man who had built things, a man who understood foundations. And I knew the foundation of my own family was cracked and needed to be demolished before it collapsed entirely. I didn't check into the modest inn. I drove to the Fairmont, a grand old hotel perched atop Nob Hill, a place that spoke of old money and quiet power. I needed the anonymity and the gravitas. I was not a father seeking refuge. I was a strategist establishing a command center. After a seamless check-in, I took the elevator to my room on the 14th floor. It had a commanding view of the city and the bay. I didn't unpack. I ordered a pot of black coffee from room service, and as I waited, I stood by the window watching the city below come to life. The first rays of sun were now striking the top of the Transamerica Pyramid. It was time. I took out my phone and dialed a number I knew by heart. It rang twice. A crisp, professional voice answered. Evelyn Reed. Evelyn, it's Leo Sterling. I kept my voice steady, devoid of the emotion that had churned within me all night. There was a slight pause on the other end. Leo, it's not yet 7 o'clock. Is everything all right? I sat down in the firm armchair by the window, the warm porcelain of the coffee cup, a small comfort, in my hands. Everything is becoming all right, Evelyn, I said. I apologize for the early call, but this is a matter of some urgency. I need to activate my full authority as trustee for the property on Crescent Drive in Palo Alto. I am selling it. The line was silent for a moment, but it was not the silence of shock. It was the silence of a sharp mind processing information and calculating variables. Evelyn Reed was not a lawyer you hired for emotional support. You hired her for her mind, which was as sharp and clear as a diamond. All right, Leo, she said, and I could hear the faint clicking of a keyboard in the background. I have the trust document in front of me now. The Sterling Family Revocable Trust. Let me see. More clicking. I took a slow sip of my coffee. It was black and bitter, just the way I liked it. It tasted of clarity. "Here we are," she said, her voice purely professional. Section 4, Article B. As sole grantor and trustee of this trust, you retain absolute and unrestricted authority to manage, lease, sell, or otherwise dispose of any and all assets held within the trust. This authority can be exercised at your sole discretion without the consent or prior knowledge of any named beneficiaries. She paused, then added, "The language is ironclad, Leo, just as we drafted it." "I remember," I said quietly. "You have every legal right to do this," she continued. "The title is clean and the trust is in good standing. We can have it on the market by the end of the week." Then her tone shifted slightly, losing a fraction of its legal stiffness and taking on a human edge. "Leo, as your counsel, I have to ask, are you prepared for the fallout? Kevin is the primary beneficiary designated to reside at the property. He will not take this well." I looked out the window at the sprawling city, at the thousands of lives moving in their own orbits, each with its own struggles and triumphs. My problem felt both immense and insignificant. "The consequences of inaction are far worse, Evelyn," I said. "This isn't a rash decision." I decided to tell her something I hadn't spoken of in years. "You know, when Clara and I were setting this up with you, she had one primary concern. I wanted to just give the house to Kevin, sign the deed over. I thought it would give him a head start, security." I paused, the memory of my wife's sensible, loving face clear in my mind. "But Clara, she was wiser than me. She said, 'Leo, give a man a fish, you feed him for a day. Teach a man to fish, you feed him for a lifetime. But if you just give him the whole lake, he'll only complain about the property taxes.'" She knew. Somehow she knew that true security doesn't come from unearned assets. It comes from character, from respect, from contribution. I could hear Evelyn listening patiently on the other end. "So we created the trust," I continued. "Clara called it a safety net, a place to live, a foundation to build upon. It was never meant to be a destination. It was meant to be a starting point. But my son has spent the last decade treating it like a palace he inherited. He's forgotten how to fish, Evelyn. He's forgotten that the lake even has a bottom. He thinks his entitlement is a birthright." My voice was still calm, but it was now filled with a resolve that had been forged in the fire of last night's humiliation. "Last night, he told me I don't contribute. So I have decided to contribute. I'm contributing this asset back into my control where it can do some actual good. I am prepared for the consequences." There was another moment of silence. When Evelyn spoke again, her voice was back to being all business, but with a new undercurrent of firm support. "Very well, Leo. Then let's get to work. What is your first move?" Evelyn's first question was a practical one. "Do you want me to engage a realtor? At that price point, we should look at the top firms in the valley. We can have it listed by Monday." "No," I said, my voice firm. "We are not putting it on the market. There will be no bidding war, no for sale sign on the lawn. This is going to be quiet, and it is going to be private." "An off-market sale?" Evelyn asked, a note of curiosity in her voice. "To a private buyer. Do you have someone in mind?" "I do," I replied, looking at the photo of Clara that I still held in my hand. "But not a private buyer. I want you to contact the Bay Area Hearthstone Foundation." For the first time, Evelyn sounded genuinely surprised. "Hearthstone. The nonprofit for educator and first responder housing, Leo. They can't possibly afford the market value. A property like that, it's valued at $5.8 million. Their entire annual budget is probably not much more than that. I am aware of their financial limitations," I said calmly. "That is part of the plan. Clara used to volunteer with them, you know. Back when it was just a small community project. She was a public school teacher for 35 years. She saw so many of her best colleagues, brilliant young teachers, forced to leave the district. They could shape the minds of the next generation of tech billionaires, but they couldn't afford to live in the same town. It broke her heart. She always said, "A community that outsources the housing of its teachers has lost its soul." The memory was so vivid, so powerful, it felt as though she were in the room with me. This was more than a strategy now. It was a mission. It was Clara's legacy. "I am not going to sell it to them for market value," I continued. "I am going to offer them a bargain sale. We will sell the property to the foundation for $2 million. The remaining $3.8 million will be considered a charitable donation from the trust." Evelyn was silent for a long moment. I could almost hear the gears of her brilliant legal mind turning, assessing the angles, the implications. "A bargain sale," she finally said, her voice filled with a new kind of respect. "Leo, that's strategically elegant. The trust gets a significant cash asset from the sale, and the charitable donation component creates a massive tax deduction that will offset capital gains for years to come. It's financially sound and philanthropically brilliant." "It's what Clara would have wanted," I said simply. "The house was built with money, but it can be repurposed with meaning. Can you make the call, Evelyn, present the offer? I want it done by the end of the day." "Consider it done," she said. "I'll draw up the preliminary offer sheet immediately. They will be ecstatic." The hours that followed were a masterclass in quiet efficiency. From my room at the Fairmont, I became the calm center of a silent storm of legal and financial activity. Evelyn was true to her word. By noon, she had spoken with the director of the Hearthstone Foundation, a woman named Dr. Anya Sharma, who was, by Evelyn's account, utterly floored. Dr. Sharma thought the initial call was a prank. Once she understood it was real, she was overcome with emotion, explaining that a property of that size could be converted into subsidized housing for at least 4 families. 4 families of teachers, firefighters, and paramedics who could now afford to live in the community they served. By 3 o'clock, Evelyn had emailed me the formal offer documents. I read through every line, my old CPA eyes scanning the legal jargon and financial figures. Everything was perfect, precise, and irrefutable. I signed the documents digitally using a secure portal. The first irrevocable step had been taken. My name, Leo Sterling, as trustee, was now committed to paper. As this was happening, my phone buzzed with a text message from Kevin. I looked at the screen. The name Kevin appeared above a picture of him and his family, all of them wearing matching sweaters in a professionally taken Christmas photo. They were smiling, but it looked like they were selling teeth, not sharing joy. The text read, "Hey Dad, hope you're not still sulking about last night. Jessica says you took things the wrong way. Let me know when you're coming back." I felt a cold wave of something that wasn't quite anger, but a profound, weary disappointment. He thought I was sulking. He had reduced my lifetime of dignity to a childish temper tantrum. It only strengthened my resolve. I texted back a single, simple word: busy. The next 48 hours moved with incredible speed. The Hearthstone Foundation's board called an emergency meeting and unanimously voted to accept the offer. Their finance team worked with Evelyn to secure a bridge loan from a philanthropic-minded bank, and the process of title transfer and escrow was put on a fast track. It was a testament to what could be accomplished when people were motivated by purpose instead of profit. During this time, I spoke with no one but Evelyn. I ate my meals in my room, read the newspaper, and took long walks through the steep streets of Nob Hill. I felt a sense of peace I hadn't felt in years. I was no longer a passive observer in my own life. I was an active participant shaping my own destiny and honoring the memory of my wife. Another text from Kevin arrived the next day. "Seriously, Dad, what's going on? Jessica needs to know if you're coming back so she can have the guest room cleaned. The cleaning service comes on Thursdays." The sheer breathtaking entitlement of it almost made me laugh. My presence or absence was not a matter of emotional concern, but a logistical problem, a scheduling conflict with the maid service. This was the son I had raised. This was the man who believed he was the center of the universe. I replied with 2 words this time: still busy. On the 3rd day, a Thursday, Evelyn called me. "It's done, Leo. she said, her voice carrying the satisfaction of a job well done. "The funds have been wired. The title has been recorded with the County of Santa Clara. The property at 412 Crescent Drive, Palo Alto, is now officially owned by the Bay Area Hearthstone Foundation. The Sterling Family Trust is $3.8 million richer in charitable goodwill and $2 million richer in liquid assets." It was a strange feeling, a sense of profound finality. A $5.8 million anchor, an asset that had become a symbol of my son's arrogance and my own silent complicity, had just been lifted. I had traded a piece of real estate for a piece of my soul. "Thank you, Evelyn," I said, my voice thick with an emotion I hadn't expected. "Thank you for everything." "You did the right thing, Leo," she said softly. "Now comes the hard part. What's your next move?" My next move was already planned. It was time for the quiet, efficient world of legal documents to collide with the loud, self-assured world of my son. It was time to send the letter. The world my son Kevin inhabited was built of glass and steel. His office on the 27th floor of a gleaming tower in downtown San Jose had a panoramic view of the sprawling valley below. He liked to say it gave him perspective, but I always felt it simply allowed him to look down on everyone else. On this particular Friday morning he was performing. I could picture it perfectly. He would be leaning back in his $1,000 ergonomic chair, hands clasped behind his head, holding court in front of two young startup founders who were likely burning through their investors' cash at an alarming rate. He would be using his favorite words: synergy, scalability, disruption, paradigm. Words that sounded important, but meant very little. He was not a builder like I was. He was a decorator. He took other people's ideas and added expensive-sounding jargon to them. In the middle of his pontification on leveraging brand authenticity, his assistant, a young woman named Chloe, whom he paid too little and intimidated too much, would have knocked softly on the glass door. Kevin would have waved her in with an annoyed flick of his wrist, his flow momentarily broken. She would have entered timidly, holding a crisp white FedEx envelope. "I'm so sorry to interrupt, Mr. Sterling," she would have said, "but this is a certified overnight delivery. It requires your signature." Kevin would have sighed, a loud theatrical display of his own importance. "Chloe, what have I said about interruptions during client-facing strategy sessions?" He would take the electronic scanner from her, scribbling his name with a flourish, his signature an illegible testament to his own ego. He would toss the scanner back to her and drop the envelope on his massive desk, a monument of polished oak, intending to ignore it. But the official look of it, the stark red and blue of the FedEx logo, the very weight of it in his hand, would have piqued his curiosity. Legal nuisance, most likely. Some boring paperwork from one of his shell corporations. He would gesture to the two young founders. "One moment, gentlemen. The price of success is an endless river of paperwork." He would slit the envelope open with a silver letter opener, a gift from Jessica that he kept on his desk like a trophy. He would pull out the sheaf of papers inside his eyes, scanning the first page with casual disdain. And that is when his world, so carefully constructed, would have begun to fracture. I can see the sequence of emotions as they played across his face, each one dismantling the mask of the powerful consultant. First, annoyance. What is this? Then confusion. The formal legal heading. Notice to vacate. The words would seem alien, a misprint. He would blink, his brain refusing to process the information. He would read it again, his lips moving silently. Then he would scan down the page. He'd see the address, 412 Crescent Drive, Palo Alto. His address. He would see his own name, Kevin Sterling, and the name Jessica Sterling, listed as current occupants. A small, nervous laugh might escape his lips. Some kind of ridiculous bureaucratic error. Someone was getting fired for this, but he would keep reading, a cold knot of dread beginning to form in his stomach. He would see the legal statutes cited from the California Civil Code. He would see the phrase, "pursuant to the legal sale and transfer of ownership of said property." Sale. What sale? His eyes would dart to the second page, a copy of a grant deed. The document was dense with legal text, but 2 lines would leap out at him, seared into his vision. Seller: the Sterling Family Revocable Trust, Leo Sterling, trustee. Buyer: the Bay Area Hearthstone Foundation, a 501c3 nonprofit corporation. The blood would drain from his face. The carefully maintained tan he got from the club would suddenly look like a cheap, peeling veneer over a pale canvas of shock. The papers would begin to tremble in his hand. The 2 founders would be staring at him, their pitch forgotten. "Kevin, is everything okay?" one of them might ask. But Kevin wouldn't hear him. He would be in a soundless vacuum, the only noise the frantic, panicked drumming of his own heart. He would fumble for his phone, his fingers suddenly clumsy and disobedient. He would stab at the screen, his breath coming in short, ragged gasps. Back in my hotel room, I was not waiting by the phone. I was sitting in the armchair by the window reading a biography of Harry Truman, a man I admired for his no-nonsense decisiveness. The city below was bathed in the clear light of a perfect autumn day. Ferries traced white lines across the blue water of the bay. I was at peace, Jean. When my phone began to ring, its vibration a harsh buzz on the polished wood of the side table, I did not jump. I calmly placed my bookmark in my book, took a slow sip of water, and then picked up the phone. The screen showed Kevin's face. Let it ring 3 more times before I answered, just to let the silence do its work. "Hello, Kevin," I said, my voice as calm as the placid water of the bay. The sound that came through the speaker was not a voice. It was a raw, guttural noise of pure rage and panic. "What is this? What did you do?" he screamed, his voice cracking. "I got a letter. An eviction notice. This is some kind of sick joke, right? This is a mistake." I leaned my head back against the chair. "It is not a joke, Kevin," I said, each word delivered with deliberate calm. "And it is not a mistake. A mistake it has to be. It says the house was sold. You can't sell the house. It's my house." "No," I corrected him gently. "It was never your house. It was an asset of the Sterling Family Trust. And as the trustee, I have executed a transaction. The property has been sold." I could hear him breathing heavily, a wild, cornered animal. I could picture him pacing his glass office, the young founders frozen in their seats, watching their supposed mentor completely unravel. "Sold to who this? Hearthstone Foundation. What is that? You sold my house to some charity?" "Yes," I said. "I did." "Why?" The word was a primal scream torn from the very depths of his soul. It was the question of a child who had just had his favorite toy taken away. It was the howl of a man who had built his entire identity on a foundation of sand and was now watching the tide come in. I paused. I let the silence stretch, letting his question hang in the air between San Francisco and San Jose. I looked out at the city, at the bridges connecting land masses, at the people moving with purpose. Then I gave him my answer. It was not born of anger or revenge. It was a simple statement of fact. A final entry on a ledger that had been unbalanced for far too long. "You said I don't contribute," I said, my voice soft, but carrying the unmistakable weight of finality. "So I decided to contribute my assets to people who would appreciate them. You can consider this my contribution." And then, before he could respond, before another scream or threat or plea could emerge, I ended the call. The line went dead. The conversation was over. The lesson had been delivered. I placed the phone back on the table and picked up my book. But I didn't read. I just sat there listening to the quiet feeling, the profound, unshakable peace of a world that had finally been set right. The aftermath was not a single explosion, but a series of slow, grinding collapses. I did not witness them firsthand, but Evelyn kept me discreetly informed, and the rest I could piece together. Kevin, in his panic, did exactly what I expected him to do. He threw money at the problem. He hired a high-powered law firm in San Francisco, the kind that advertises in glossy magazines and has fountains in their lobby. He and Jessica sat in a leather-appointed conference room across a table so polished they could see their own anxious reflections in it. I can picture the lead attorney, a man with silver hair and a gold watch, listening patiently to Kevin's tirade. He would have let my son vent, letting him list his grievances, his perceived injustices, his absolute certainty that some legal loophole could be found. The lawyer would have nodded, projecting an aura of expensive empathy. Then, when Kevin was finally out of breath, the lawyer would have opened a thin file folder containing the documents Evelyn had forwarded. He would have tapped a single page. "Mr. Sterling," the lawyer would have said, his voice calm and utterly devoid of hope. "The document for the Sterling Family Revocable Trust is one of the most well-drafted ironclad instruments I have ever seen. Your father, as the sole grantor and trustee, has absolute unequivocal discretion. You are a named beneficiary, which entitles you to be a recipient of the trust's assets, but it does not grant you any ownership or control over them. He did not need your permission. He did not need to inform you. His actions were perfectly, and I must say brilliantly, legal. There is no case here. There is no loophole. There is nothing I can do for you." The silence in that room would have been more devastating than any shouting match. The finality of the law, cold and impartial, was a wall Kevin could not bully, charm, or buy his way through. The six-figure retainer he had paid was gone, spent on a 20-minute meeting that only confirmed his powerlessness. The fight that followed as they drove back down the highway must have been spectacular. The carefully constructed partnership of their marriage, built on the shared goal of managing my wealth, had just been declared bankrupt. Now came the liquidation of blame. Jessica's voice sharp with fury. "I told you, Kevin. I told you not to push him. You and your arrogant mouth. You always had to be the smartest man in the room. And now look where we are. We're homeless." And Kevin's retort, filled with the vitriol of a cornered animal. "Me. This was you and your obsession with status, the parties, the designer clothes, the vacations. You're the one who couldn't stand living in a normal house. You're the one who saw my father as a walking bank account. You pushed me to ask for more, always more." They were both right, of course. Their friends, the ones who had flocked to their lavish dinner parties and poolside barbecues, began to disappear. The calls went unanswered. The invitations stopped arriving. Their social standing had been tied to the house, to the illusion of inherited power. Without the house, they were just another couple in their 40s, drowning in debt and facing the harsh reality of the Silicon Valley housing market. Their world, once a glittering showcase of success, had been exposed as a cheap stage set, and the lights had just been turned off. 3 months later, I returned to 412 Crescent Drive. I parked my car on the street, the same street where I had once felt like an intruder. The grand, imposing facade of the house was unchanged, but something felt different. A new sign made of simple, elegant carved wood stood near the driveway. It read, "The Clara Sterling House for Community Educators." There was no gala, no press, no flashy event. The Hearthstone Foundation was hosting a small welcome reception on the lawn for the first 4 families who would be moving in. I saw Dr. Sharma, the director, and she greeted me with a warm, genuine hug. "Leo," she said, her eyes shining, "come, I want you to meet someone." The vast, cold living room where I had last seen my son was now warm and filled with the sound of children's laughter. The sterile modern furniture was gone, replaced by comfortable sofas and bookshelves filled with donated books. A young woman with a kind face and tired eyes approached me, holding the hand of a little bummer who looked to be about 6. "Mr. Sterling," she said, her voice filled with an emotion that made my throat tighten. "I'm Sarah. I teach 3rd grade at the elementary school down the road. For 2 years, my son and I have been living in a tiny 1-bedroom apartment 40 miles away. I spent 3 hours a day commuting. I almost quit last year. Because of you, because of your wife. We get to stay. I get to teach in the community I love. My son gets to have a real home. She squeezed her son's hand. Thank you. I don't think you'll ever know how much this means. I looked at her, at the hope in her eyes, at the little boy who now had a safe place to grow up, and I felt a profound sense of peace settle over me. There was no victory, no triumph, no feeling of revenge. There was only a quiet, powerful sense of rightness. This was the house Clara would have wanted. I stood there for a long time watching the families mingle, watching teachers and firefighters share stories, their children playing on the lawn that was now a shared community space. My son's angry, desperate face flashed in my memory, and for the first time I felt a flicker not of anger but of pity. I did not take a house from my son. I gave him an opportunity. The opportunity to build a life of his own, not one handed to him on a silver platter. I gave him the chance to learn the value of contribution, not by receiving it, but by being forced to create it himself. The door to my life is not closed to him forever, but it is no longer wide open, a gate to be entered and exited at his convenience. It is now a door that must be earned, opened with a key forged from humility and respect. Whether he chooses to forge that key is up to him. My work is done. I have honored my wife. I have protected our legacy. I have transformed a monument of entitlement into a foundation of hope. I have at last restored order. And in the silence that followed the storm, I have found my own dignity again. This story teaches a powerful lesson about the true meaning of legacy and self-respect. It shows that generosity without boundaries can accidentally foster entitlement, and kindness, when consistently unreciprocated, can be mistaken for weakness. The ultimate act of contribution isn't always financial support, but the difficult decision to uphold one's own dignity. True strength lies not in emotional reactions, but in calm, strategic action that reestablishes order and honor. It reminds us that our worth is not defined by how others treat us, but by the values we refuse to compromise, even for family. Have you ever had to make a difficult choice to teach a loved one a lesson about respect? Let me know in the comments below.